Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Political Vigilante. My name is Graham Elwood. I'm here with Patreon supporter Lucas Pompey. Lucas, how are you?
Good. Great.
Well, thanks for supporting the show and being an open-minded progressive or whatever you call yourself that doesn't want to be fed the nonsense of the corporate media. First, I'll ask you this: What started to turn you on to pursuing, or watching independent media?
Well, I have a relative, an uncle, who thinks very open-minded because he's like one of the only people in my family who actually has like moved out of Ohio and like gone out and seen the world and like worked different jobs and had some experiences and everything. And so he came back and kind of introduced me to the world of like indie media, thinking critically, and permaculture and like sustainable agriculture. That's another interest of mine that I could talk about forever. But so he kind of introduced me into all that and like diet and how to critically examine the diet universe and like food and nutrition and all that kind of stuff and how to traverse all that and not fall down a rabbit hole of fake news or whatever.
Right.
And then whenever 2012 came along, I was the only 13-year-old supporting Jill Stein in all my county, probably like the whole country, maybe, I don't know. But then in 2015, whenever Bernie announced his run, my uncle told me about that the day it happened. And as soon as I heard Bernie speak, I was in it for like the long haul. Like I really got all in. I was all in on his. I was a sophomore at the time. And like every day in study hall, I was constantly on the computer reading, like, did he win the primary last night? Is he going to win tonight? What's going on? And I was watching, like, that's when I first like discovered like TYT, and I was watching them a lot during the primaries. And then after Bernie lost the primaries, there was like a shift there. Like I noticed, and Jimmy Dore seemed like the only voice of reason on the whole show a lot of the time, and he ended up being right about a lot of things, if not everything, that about like whenever he called the election, like the long-term thinking, Trump being like better long-term than Hillary, that kind of thing, and like what would happen to the parties, if Trump gets elected. And whenever I saw, hey, this guy actually was right about some stuff, whereas everybody else has been wrong, then I started listening to him and watching his videos. I've watched almost every one of his videos since I first like discovered him in September of 2016. So big fan of Jimmy, and then you were on Jimmy's show. That was how I discovered you. And then I watch a ton of your videos now, and I watch Ron Bacone's videos and Redacted Tonight and Secular Talk, and occasionally TYT, not really that often anymore, just because it doesn't feel that different from the mainstream narrative anymore. Like it used to be different. Like it used to feel like they were framing it correctly. Like that was the main reason I got really into indie media, is because even if it's the same story, there's a way that you frame it that puts people into a certain headspace that like makes them susceptible, and like that's how propaganda works. Like propaganda, if you repeat something enough, everyone thinks it's true. Same with like this Russia thing. Just because it's been said over and over and over again, the average person takes it as a matter of fact that Russia hacked our election, and Donald Trump's a Manchurian candidate, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a foregone conclusion. Oh, Julian Assange is a Russian puppet.
Exactly.
Single-payer healthcare is pie in the sky. Like they just say these, they repeat literally word for word the narratives that come out, and that's when you know that the propaganda machine is very, very effective. So, you were telling me you were at an event recently.
Yes, in November I went to an event called State of American Democracy. A couple of weeks before I had met the man hosting it, David Orr. He's a man I look up to. He was, I think, the environmental advisor to Jimmy Carter. Like he worked with the Jimmy Carter administration on the environment and that kind of thing. And he came and did a talk with Fact Ohio, which is like all the faith communities of Ohio coming together for sustainability. So like different faiths, they all realized that we need sustainability. And so there was a statewide meeting, and it just happened to be in my town, which is cool. So it was, drive down the road. I got to meet David Orr. And it was crazy because it was only a week after I first heard about him, because he was on a podcast I listened to with another guy, James Howard Kunstler. And I heard about him, liked what he had to say about college and it being a racket nowadays and everything, because it's true. I'm in it right now. I'm actually in the library at my school right now.
Oh, wow.
whenever I met him, he invited me to go to this conference, and he said that he'd waive the fee since I'm invited. And like most people who got to go were invited, so the fees were waived. But whenever I went, there was a lot of high-profile people there, like professors from Yale and Harvard, and rich entrepreneur people, and people who are driving Porsches, and people who can afford to get a plane ticket overnight and fly there, and then fly back the same day. And there was dozens of speakers, and out of all the speakers, only 2 were critical of the Russian narrative.
Really?
Yeah, it was crazy. Just like Reverend William Barber. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's the one leading the Poor People's Campaign movement, and he's very vocal on Twitter. But whenever he came and spoke, he was the final speaker. And whenever he came and spoke, it was amazing because not only was he an amazing speaker who sounds like the modern day Martin Luther King Jr., but he was the first speaker to realize that the Russian narrative, the Russia story, is distracting from all the other issues. There was the only other person who's critical was saying that we can't take the Russia Facebook thing seriously because Facebook can sell you ads and then show it to 10 people and say they showed it to 10,000. There's no way to actually verify or measure any of that. But Reverend William Barber was the only person out of the entire conference to go up on stage and say that the Russia thing is a distraction. It was crazy. Like that, the entire time I felt like I was so alone there. And especially being the youngest person there at 18 at the time, now 19, it was crazy to be in a room of all these people talking about the future from a perspective from 1980 and 1970. They're all talking about the future as if we are living back in the era of Reagan and Carter, and as if the bell curve still exists, and not the Overton window, and as if you're just right or you're just left, you're liberal or you're conservative. The third parties aren't that, they were trying to say that we had to reform the Democratic Party or else there was no way, to go forward because they were saying Republicans were too far gone. And it was just a really crazy example of the bubble that people from New York and LA and DC are all living in. And whenever they all got in this room together at Oberlin, at the Oberlin Hotel in Oberlin, Ohio, they brought that bubble with them. And I tried talking to some people outside of that, and some of them were like, wow, you really think critically? I never thought of it that way. And other people were like, but come on, they colluded, there was collusion. And then you're say, you can't tell me they didn't collude when, and they would go off and give some example that doesn't prove anything,
And the other thing too, the fallacies and all of that, it's we were talking about this on the Super Chat Sunday. Okay, sure. If there's some legitimate stuff, why can't? Yeah, let's investigate it. But why is it the only thing we're investigating and the only thing we're talking about? And if we are going to investigate it, why do we just immediately not even talk about, or if it is brought up, it's immediately dismissed, all of the elections we've rigged in this that America has done? We're this benevolent, wonderful, flourishing democracy that the evil, demon communists came over, and it's just such a preposterous and outdated, as you say, narrative that people just can't. I always ask people, friends of mine that are really smart who literally believe, Julian Assange is a Russian puppet and all this stuff, and I'm just like, don't you see when he challenges power, then he's smeared. If he was challenging right-wing power, which he has, he's smeared by the right. When he challenges, a so-called left or Democrat power, he's smeared from the left. And why are we not talking about the 130 kids that die every day in Yemen as a direct result of our proxy war with Saudi Arabia? Why are we never talking about the evil shit Saudi Arabia does? Why are we not talking about there's still contaminated water in Flint, Michigan? There's earthquakes and explosions throughout this country due to fracking. Why isn't none of that being brought up? We could bring that up and still investigate Russia, fine. But Jill Stein, it's insane, and people don't see how insane it sounds.
Well, and to go with that point about lead in Flint, Michigan, another thing they talked about at this conference, because it was on State of American Democracy, and a year after the election, everyone was reeling, and everyone still couldn't believe it. And one of the things that was going on was the demonization of social media and like as being a source of fake news. And you could tell it was from these people who lived in the bubble and have never thought critically about the arguments for and against social media. And they were trying to say that, and they presented this one-sided argument throughout the entire conference, showing how easy it was to fool people using social media and how easy it was to get people to stay home, and how the Facebook ads, turned the election for Trump and all this, crazy bullshit. I mean, it was just insane how they did this. And, I ended up sitting and asking the question, how can you demonize new media when without new media, we would not know about Flint, Michigan, nor would we know about the 3,000 communities in the United States that have lead levels higher than Flint, Michigan, and it's how they can say that the fake news and living in an alternate reality is worse now whenever the media is democratized as compared to when it used to be run by just a handful of people. The Holocaust didn't become a national news story in the United States for years, even though all the newspaper barons knew it was happening, because a lot of them had fascist sympathies and were being paid by larger corporations like GM and Henry Ford to not cover it.
Yeah.
And to say that we are living in an era of fake news now might be true, but to say that we never were before is completely false. Like, to say that the Vietnam War, like, everyone romanticizes this idea back whenever all of the media companies got along and had this coherent narrative that we all live by, and that was considered like reality, and now since no one agrees on it, everyone sees it as everyone's living out of reality. And back in the days whenever there was a coherent narrative, the reason that the narrative was coherent was because the CIA had people working in every news station in the country, giving them all the same information and telling them what to say on air, and same with the newspapers and same with the radio.
Yeah, it's why the mainstream media is not covering the DNC lawsuit. If you want to go back, this idealization of, I mean, yes, there was more independent newspapers back in the day, and there wasn't 6 multinational conglomerates that owned every single major media outlet, but they've been doctoring this. If you read, I reference this book a lot, is Death of the Liberal Class. Hedges talks about George Creel in World War I was hired by Woodrow Wilson to get America on board with going into World War I. Prior to that money being spent on that propaganda, most Americans were calling it Wall Street's war. And why are we going to send American boys overseas? And then, like, the song Over There, the war to end all wars, these were marketing slogans, and they used all the popular media of the time, which was radio and print and magazines, and there was this new medium called film, and they made this movie about the evil Kaiser, and they spent this money, and within a year and a half, 2 years, America was like fired up to go into World War I. And it's so funny, you bring that up to people, and they're just like, huh? And they don't, I mean, look at the first Gulf War. The first Gulf War was a complete media blackout because they learned the lesson of showing the Vietnam War on TV. People saw the Vietnam War on TV and went, well, this is nonsense. I don't want to be a part of this. So then we got the Gulf War narrative. Oh my God, it was like watching Mein Kampf. It was like what we're going to take it to Saddam and this, that, and the other thing. And no one's talking about, Saddam had been wanting to get off the petrodollar or anything. None of that is talked about. None of that is ever talked about. So let me ask you this, after coming away from that concert, or I give you, it's awesome to hear that you've been politically active since you were about 13, which is great. And, I've said this before, millennials, unfortunately, don't have the luxury as other generations had to kind of dick off in their 20s and then start paying attention. That's not a slam like, oh, you kids today. It's not one of those dumb things. But it's like my generation was able to kind of dick off in our 20s and then start paying attention. And I think it's too critical for people to not pay attention. So I applaud you for paying attention. And before we wrap up here, what is sort of your goal, or what is your, I mean, I know you're in college and everything, but what do you see your sort of target or your path in terms of being involved and being a critical thinker, and what do you see as the best way for someone else out there who's maybe in your shoes, they're 18, 19, they're in college or whatever, how are you getting involved, And how would you suggest other people get involved?
Well, one of the ways is indie media, of course. Listening to podcasts to educate myself. I listen to a lot of history podcasts, like the Dollop. I listen to Citations Needed from FAIR. Around the Empire is a good one, Joanne Leon. I listen to your podcast or watch your New York News show, Jimmy Dore. I also have seen, Oliver Stone's Untold History of the United States on Netflix, which is a really good, really concise background on the empirical history of the United States, like when the empire began, how it's stretched out, the effects it's had on other countries. Another thing is like I try to increase my communication skills, because I used to be very antisocial and very poor communicator, and like I would suck at talking to people. And so to increase my communication skills, if I'm out in a public setting, almost always my phone is in my pocket. And if I'm bored, I have to go talk to somebody. I try not to use my phone in public as much as possible, because that's one of the main reasons that my generation is lacking so many things cognitively when it comes to speaking, holding a conversation, thinking critically. See, I'm struggling to think of the words right now. That's like one of the reasons is if you're constantly taking in information and never having any thoughts of your own, then you're not really thinking. You're just repeating. You're just you're just being a sponge that's soaking it all up. And then, whenever someone pushes you, you spurt it all out. And I kind of have that in that I'm constantly taking in a lot of information, and it's just scrambling around up here all the time. So when I talk to somebody, it's kind of like the dam bursts and all this information just floods out. But at the same time, because I do take breaks and I try to, get into music and do the occasional productive distraction from this, that has helped me a lot in being more sociable, getting in places, that's how I got to go to that conference, is because I had the confidence to go up and speak to David Orr. Like one of the things is just getting up the confidence to go and talk to people. Like that's one of the biggest things that we could all do to increase our getting involved. And if you can talk to people really well, then people want to listen to you, and you can listen to people. And if you can do that, then you could, maybe help out with a campaign that you care about, and you can go knock on doors or convince people, to vote for them, or phone bank, There's a million ways to get involved. Like one of the things that I try to tell people is that you can vote with your dollar. I think voting with your dollar is just as important, if not more important, than voting actually voting. Because actually voting, a lot of times they'll throw your vote out, using cross-check and other methods. And, if you vote with your dollar, that is sending a message loud and clear that you don't support that company. I use an app called Boycott now, where you can scan the barcode of any product, and it'll tell you if the parent company is doing something you disagree with. And it's really great, because there's a lot of things that I used to get that I do not get anymore, because I found out that, the parent company was Nestle, or because it was General Mills, and because, they treat their workers bad, or because of how the meat's raised, or anything like that.
Boycott. All right. I'm going to look into that app. Well, Lucas, thank you so much for supporting the show on the Patreon, and thank you for being involved and paying attention. And I really like the putting the phone in the pocket. That's not just your generation. Everyone could stand to do that and interact a little more. Technology is fantastic. We're able to sit here and talk right now. We're on opposite ends of the country. I can video chat with someone on the other end of the planet with this, which is pretty cool. But then it does lend itself to just like doing that and not interacting and not having an actual face-to-face conversation, which I think are really, really critical and really important. So thanks for supporting the show, and keep doing what you're doing, man. I appreciate it. And hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Alrighty. Thank you.